Hello and welcome to the Nutrition for Breeding Success webinar series with Connolly's Red Mills in collaboration with the Irish Horse Board. We're very excited to be hosting what is the second of this instalment, which is going to take a bit of time to look at early foal nutrition and preparing your mare for covering. So for so many breeders, there are foals on the ground or else it's an imminent expectation. So it's a really good opportunity for us to get to sit down and have a little bit of a chat about what you should be looking out for to make sure that your mare gets the best chance for recovering, but also to support your foal and that foal gets the best chance at being set up for success. So without further ado, I will introduce you to Erin Campbell. Erin is a member of our expert nutrition team here at Connolly's Red Mills. We are going to save just for any questions. We will answer them towards the end if people have them. But yeah, we'll kick on. And Erin, take the stage.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us. If you were here for the first episode of this webinar series, you'll know that we discussed nutrition for the mare in late pregnancy and supporting that stage before we get to where we are now with early foal nutrition and preparing your mare to go back into pregnancy again. So hopefully we're getting a few foals on the ground now and getting a little bit closer to the bulk of it. But if your mare isn't due until further towards the end of the summer, that's also fine, because being prepared is key to this, as we all know. So we will make a start and we'll just keep tipping along. Like Sarah said, if you have questions, then we'll go through those at the end. Okay, so first things first is that we want to make sure everything went okay with foaling. Were there any complications that might have required veterinary intervention? If so, you need to make sure to keep in contact with your vet to make sure you keep that mare and foal stable. Some other things that we look for early signs are whether the foal stood up and suckled within the first couple of hours. Hopefully that's the case. For the sake of this presentation, to keep things straightforward, we're going to assume that there hasn't been any major complications with foaling and everything's been normal for the mare and foal, because that just makes it a little bit more simple. And it's just important to note that from the start, it doesn't matter whether you're breeding a foal for the show ring, a thoroughbred for the racecourse, or something for a future breeding potential as part of your breeding program. Getting the nutrition correct from the start is key to developing that healthy, sound individual. So we'll start from the start and we'll go from there with intentions of making sure that it's staying as high quality as possible. So the first thing we want to look at before we even think about feeding the foal, when it comes to foaling time, it's just another thing that you want to kind of check off. You need to make sure that you're keeping the mare's diet as consistent as possible around foaling time. We don't want any major dietary changes that can increase the risk of things like colic, which obviously we don't want. So it's really important to just try and keep things as steady and consistent as possible around this time, because there's enough going on for the mare and enough changes without adding any dietary disturbances to that as well. So around foaling time, it's often worth considering using something like a hot mash. That can be quite beneficial for keeping the gut moving and increasing that gut motility. So using something like our comfort mash is really popular around foaling time, and for good reason. So comfort mash is a quick soaking, high fiber conditioning mash. It's a bran mash. And it's fully balanced with all the vitamins and minerals. So that means that it can be fed as a sole feed if needed. And that's usually not the case for mashes. So that kind of sets comfort mash apart from any other mashes on the market. So it's really important that you look at the type of mash that you would be getting if this is something you're going to consider around foaling time. The one thing that I would point out is that with bran mashes in particular, it's really important to look at calcium content. So bran is typically quite high in phosphorus, and if the ratio of calcium to phosphorus isn't rectified and becomes unbalanced, so if your phosphorus is too high, that ratio of the calcium to phosphorus becomes unbalanced. The ideal ratio is 2 to 1 calcium to phosphorus. So you want to keep that ideal, because when it becomes unbalanced, it can have an effect on things like skeletal health and bone development. So that's really important when you think about that developing foal. So you just want to make sure that everything is kept at the optimum ratio where possible. If you are using a mash post-foaling, it's really beneficial for hydration as well as gut motility, like I mentioned, because the mare is obviously going through a lot at that time, and it can help just rehydrate them, also stimulate appetite afterwards. But the one thing I would say is start using it a few weeks before foaling and get the mare used to it, because you don't want to, like I said, have any drastic changes straight after foaling to increase the risk of things like colic. So keeping that routine is crucial. Maintain normal routine as much as possible in the lead up to foaling, mainly to reduce stress. You don't want to increase stress for the mare. You want to keep things as straightforward as possible, because as we know, horses being horses, things can go wrong as it is. So where we can, we like to try and keep that nice and steady and nice and normal. So that's the first stage, is the mare's diet. Then we move on to look at the importance of colostrum. So when our mares foals are born with what we call a naive immune system. So they don't have a fully developed immune system, and they must receive their immune defenses from their mother. And that happens through the transfer of colostrum, which provides the foal with IgGs, immunoglobulins is what they're called, but everyone refers to them as IgGs. And that gives them the antibodies they need to be able to then fight infection, so to build up that immune system. So IgGs are transferred through colostrum, like I said, and that is the first milk that your mare produces, that liquid gold as it's referred to, the nice sticky yellowish liquid. That is really important for your foals. And that really is the first stage of foal nutrition. That's where foal nutrition starts. Don't underestimate the importance, like I said, of early on. Colostrum is where nutrition starts. So it's really important they receive it. They receive it through passive transfer. And we ideally want that to happen within the first 8 hours. But it is absolutely necessary to happen within 24 hours. So that's because there are some specialized cells within the gut and in the full small intestine that will only allow absorption of those crucial IgGs within that time frame. So the effectiveness of that absorption starts to decline after 8 hours, and then after 24 hours the absorption is kind of no longer effective. So that's why it's so important to get that transfer early on. And then what we would always recommend is that you check with your vet then what those IgG levels are, to make sure the foal has received them and to avoid things like failure of passive transfer. So not to get too specific into numbers and things, but if your IgG levels are below roughly 400 milliliters per deciliter, then that might indicate things like failure of passive transfer. So you want to make sure they've got the colostrum, it's of good enough quality, and you can go from there. If they haven't, that's when veterinary intervention can occur, and they can then do a transfer of IgGs intravenously. So it can be helped outside of happen naturally, but it's just important to be aware of what's going on and to really check that after 24 hours to make sure that it has happened. So don't underestimate colostrum. And then after colostrum, you'll be looking at some other bits and pieces. So this is all before we start to even think about feed. So what I'm trying to stress here is that nutrition doesn't start whenever you start giving them hard feed. It starts at the very beginning. So some other considerations are meconium, which is the first feces, should be passed within 24 hours. That's generally a good indication of good gut function. So it's good practice to kind of note the colour, consistency, the time it had passed, the amount that had passed, just to keep track of these things. Meconium staining can sometimes happen if there's been struggles in when the foal was being born. That could be indicated by the colour of their coat. That can lead to further issues, which is, you know, that's where your vet steps in, and that's no longer anything to do with nutrition. But it's just important to be aware that these things need to happen early on, and you want to kind of avoid any stressful situations. So keep an eye on their coat. If it looks yellowish and stained, that might be an indication that meconium has passed and they've aspired that through the amniotic fluid. So just be aware of these things, and speak to your vet if there's any issues, but it's just to keep in mind that you want that to have passed. Then other things that are important is urination. Urination should be quite frequent in the first 24 or 48 hours. Shouldn't be any straining when they're urinating. Like, for example, a 50-kilo foal will produce roughly around 7.5 litres of urine a day for the first couple of days. That means obviously you'll see them urinating quite frequently, maybe every time they rise after they've rested or whatever it might be. But just make sure it's happening regularly and it seems fine. They don't seem too stressed when it's occurring, and you're not seeing any kind of abnormal gut issues with a distended abdomen or anything like that. That's, again, obviously on the veterinary side if there's any issues. So it's just a case of being aware of these things. And then also don't underestimate the simple things. Like if your foal looks nice and bright in their eye, they're looking to suckle often with their mum, and, you know, they seem healthy and happy, that's a great sign. You know, it's not to be underestimated either. So they're just some things to keep in mind, that after your foal has had its colostrum, these things will also be happening in the early stages, before we then look at the mare's milk. So after all this has happened, we're looking at nutrition from the mare's milk. So the broodmare can provide all of the foal's nutritional requirements for growth and development and immune protection for up to 3 months of life. The quality of that milk will be high enough to support their nutrient requirements for 3 months roughly. And then the quality of that milk starts to decline. So it's really important early on that that's kind of, you know, you're aware of the importance of that in the early stages. You want to look at the mare's milk as the main source of nutrition for your nursing foal in early life. Intake should be around 20 to 25% of their body weight per day in the first 4 weeks. So they'll be suckling quite often. It will happen a lot. That's a good sign. The quality of milk is also really important. We discussed that in the last webinar on how the quality of the nutrition you provide in the final trimester of pregnancy can support the quality of that milk. So we would have discussed that previously. When it gets to this stage and the foal's on the ground, from a nutrition point of view, there are certain things that you can help with, but realistically that needs to be planned ahead and needs to be supported on a longer time frame rather than just once the foal is on the ground. So on the right hand side of the slide there, you'll see that in the first 24 hours they will suckle quite often and roughly consume 8 to 11 litres of milk per day. So that will help support them through the early stages of life. That helps develop their gut and the maturation of the microbes in their gut and really help develop their digestive system. So they're getting everything they need, hopefully, from the mare's milk in early stages. However, it's not always as straightforward as that. If you have a mare with inadequate milk supply, then there are other things that you might need to intervene with. So let's say, for example, before 3 weeks of age, if you have a mare that's got inadequate milk supply, then you might need to think of things like milk replacer. So if you're struggling with your mare producing the right amount, you think your foal isn't getting enough, then you really need to think about using generally a powdered milk replacer in the early stages, because before 3 weeks of age, they won't really be able to grind anything with their teeth. They don't have the dentition to break it down, absorb and everything properly. So if you need to add from a milk supply before 3 weeks of age, it would have to be a powdered version to make up that difference, really. From 3 weeks onwards, you can then start looking at creep feed. So if your mare really isn't giving you enough and your foal is looking weak, you're not really happy with how it's thriving, you know, you're just struggling a little bit, then you can start to look at supporting their nutrition and their requirements for growth through a hard feed. So there's a few different types of creep feed, which we'll look at in terms of how you're going to make each of them work or why you would use one over the other. But it is safe to start creep feeding from 3 weeks onwards. It's not necessary from that stage. If your mare is producing enough milk, you don't have to start creep feeding. It really depends on how your foal is doing, how they're thriving, how they're looking. If they have any ill thrift, then it might be a clue that you need to give them some extra support. So yeah, that's where creep feed starts to come in. So there's a few different ways we can creep feed. We can do this by using some things like Foal pellets, Foal and yearling mix, or there's also things like Grow Care Balancer. But when there's so many options out there, obviously it can be a bit daunting and it can be a bit, well, how do I decide what to use and, you know, which is which. Generally, for your foals that are maybe smaller, weaker, need that little bit more help, you would opt for something like Foal pellets or Foal and yearling mix. They're more calorific, high plane of nutrition with, you know, obviously a high quality protein source to support growth and development, but you're also getting that dense, energy dense feed with the Foal pellets or Foal and yearling mix. On the contrast then, if you had stronger foals, but the mare wasn't producing enough milk and you thought you needed to support that foal from a nutrient point of view rather than from a condition point of view, you would then opt for something like Grow Care Balancer, because that can give you the quality nutrition you need to support their requirements for growth and development without providing too many calories. So you're going to avoid them getting too heavy. Obviously, this is all a balancing act. You want to support them and make sure they're getting everything they want, but you don't want them going too heavy, because then you run the risk of joint issues, OCDs, all that kind of stuff. So choosing the right creep feed can be tricky sometimes, but that's where contacting us directly can be of benefit. You can contact the office. My email and things will be shared at the end of the presentation. If you ever have any you know, specific things that you're really not sure of, contact us. We also have an Ask the Expert section on our website, so you can go through that and put in your queries through there, and one of us from the nutrition team will get back to you with some specific advice. So that gives you a general rule, kind of like weaker foals, stronger foals, but there can obviously be lots of other complications when it comes to foals and things going wrong. And obviously it depends on what everyone's land is like with their grass quality and things like that as well. So like, this is just a guide, really, is what I'm trying to put across. If you want specific advice, we are there. That's what we're for. Don't be afraid to contact us, and we will try and guide you in the right way as much as possible. So that's where creep feeding can come in. Alongside creep feeding, sometimes you need a little bit of other support, or you might not need an extra feed, but you might just want to help them a little bit. Things like the 4-neck round Frisca foal is great. If there's one thing that I would tell everybody to take away from this, Frisca foal is a great supplement. So it's basically a multivitamin, and prebiotic syrup. And it's just a lovely addition for foals early in life. You can feed it from kind of 48 hours onwards, given that the foal's okay. It's really palatable. Foals love it. I've used it myself. You give it to them once or twice and they come running for it the next few days. It's really just a lovely addition. It helps give them that little bit of boost. that, you know, if they might be a little bit lackluster, or you're just not 100% sure, are they getting everything? You might not be, you know, just fully convinced. It's just an easy way of giving them that little bit of extra help. Their immune defenses are obviously low and at risk early in life. This multivitamin helps give that extra immune support. Their gut development is obviously, it's a big factor in early life. Their gut is developing all the time when they're young. So from that aspect, the prebiotic obviously helps as well. And it's just an easy supplement to use. It's very beneficial. It's also good to use around any times of stress or illness. Now, this isn't going to cure illness. Don't get that confused at all. Any sort of illness, obviously your vet should be involved, but say they've been treated for something, or something's gone wrong and they're coming out of it and they just need that little bit of boost, a little bit of help, this is where this can be really, really beneficial. So something like that is always a nice addition as well. Your mare might be fine producing enough milk. This is just an easy addition, really, to help support in early life, because there's a lot of changes going on for these foals. And I mentioned gut health in foals. They are having a lot of digestive changes in early life. Their gut will develop at different stages. So, for example, their stomach, and then their small intestine, then their large intestine. There's been a lot of research over the last few years in terms of gut development in foals, how the microbiome develops at what different stages. The gut microbiome is basically different types of microbes and bacteria within the digestive system. You want a level of diversity to this. You don't want there to be one type or one family or whatever it might be of bacteria and microbes. You want there to be a certain level of diversity to build that gut health. So that happens over a period of time, obviously, but it does start early in life, and we know that now. We thought it didn't happen until later, but there's new research to suggest it happens earlier. So this is developing from early on. Your foal is supported in early life by the mare, but as they're out in the fields and they're hopefully fine and no complications, they'll start picking at grass, they'll start maybe picking at a bit of mum's feed, and their gut will start to develop as a result. As it develops, some imbalances can sometimes happen. And when imbalances occur, the most common consequence is diarrhea. So using something like Atazorb or any binding agent can be needed sometimes with foals with diarrhea. Sometimes it's just stress. Like, stress can cause diarrhea almost instantly with foals. And sometimes they just need a little bit of help. So Atazorb has a binding agent within it, which kind of helps bring everything together, also supported with some electrolytes, and just give them that little bit of help, because their gut is going through so many changes. It's prone to diarrhea so much more frequently. So it can just help them, give them some support during those stressful periods when diarrhea might occur. And it's also, just on the topic of gut health, important to, you know, make sure things like vaccinations, strategic worming, appropriate nutrition management, they can all reduce the incidence of gut issues in foals. So make sure that you're kind of being on top of things like that. Worming is obviously very complex at the minute, and with so much resistance, it's a very difficult one. But speak to your vets on that for a specific worming program, because being specific with it seems to be quite beneficial, rather than you know, the way we would have used worming in the past. So then, moving on from your nutrition of your mare and supporting gut health and all of that, you're then starting to look at covering your mare again. The first thing I would say is body condition is absolutely crucial. So you want your mare, when you're coming into covering her again, to have good to improving body condition when it comes to covering. There's loads of influential factors that can affect this aside from just feed. And getting your mare's cycling can be affected by so many different things. Weather can obviously have a huge impact. But where we can is, you know, control the controllables. Try and keep your mare as stress-free as possible. with minimal changes to daily routine. Maintain that high level of nutrition. So when we spoke about what they were getting for that last trimester, continue that right through to covering again and support. You also want to support lactation up until, like I said, that 3-month mark for your foals. So that high level of nutrition that you had in the final trimester of pregnancy, that should be continuing on through this stage as well, to make sure that they're providing that optimal milk for the foal while also getting their body again ready to be cycling and covered again. So body condition is absolutely crucial. Support that with feed and try and minimize stress. The other thing then that comes into when you're covering your mare is supporting fertility. So things like vitamin E, selenium, lysine, omega-3s, sorry, one sec, and yeah, they have all been seen to be positive in supporting fertility. So we have a product called VSL, which is literally what it says on the tin. It's vitamin E, selenium, and lysine. All three of those things can help to support fertility in mares and have all been seen to have positive impacts. So again, an easy way of supporting it. Practically the most easy way of giving it is kind of to start VSL maybe potentially a month before foaling and continue it up until after covering. That can just help support them through that stages, because vitamin E being an antioxidant can help kind of keep things controlled, and selenium obviously is an antioxidant, and then your lysine is an amino acid. That can just help support everything the whole way through. Then omega-3s are generally in a supplement form provided through the likes of our Kentucky Carron oil. That provides the optimal ratio of omega-3s to omega-6s. It helps to improve reproductive efficiency. It's been shown to increase conception rates, live foal birth rates. So things like that can really be of benefit as well. It's important to note that not all oils are the same. So for example, soya oil contains around like 6 times less omega-3 fatty acids than the likes of linseed or flaxseed oil, which is what's in our Kentucky Carron oil. So just be aware of the quality of things that you're looking to get. Not any oil will have the same effects. So these are like some simple ways of optimizing the diet to improve fertility where possible. It's not a golden rule. It's not to say that if you feed VSL and Kentucky Carron oil that your mare that you've been struggling to get in foal is definitely going to take. It's just some ways that can help. So if you've a mare that's a bit tricky, it's worth giving a go, because you know these things are hard enough to support. And just try and take every precaution to improve those chances of conception, because we don't get many chances of trying to get them covered with a small time frame. The other thing then I would suggest around covering time is the immune support for your mare. There's a lot of things going on internally for their system, and we're asking a lot of their bodies to support a foal at foot, maintain their body condition, get their own body prime, ready for getting pregnant again. There's a lot going on, and the first thing to dip is their immune system. So Chevenol is a multivitamin that can be used as a short-term thing in terms of giving their immune system a boost. So if you use Chevenol for something like 4 to 6 weeks around that time that you want to be covering, that helps just give their immune system that little bit of a boost post-foaling, pre-covering, and kind of just gives them that bit of help. It's almost like, say, the mare's version of what I said about Friscofol. Friscofol was used to give the foal that little bit of a boost. You can use Chevenol for 4 to 6 weeks to kind of give the mare that bit of a boost. It's really, these are simple ways of using supplements to give you that fighting chance, if you like. But like I said, they're not giveaways to say that if you use these, you'll have no problems. Horses are horses. These are just ways of supporting fertility that we've learned through research. These dietary factors can have an impact. And then that's kind of the majority of it from a nutrition point of view. The other thing that I would point out is, you know, don't forget the overall aim is to have a happy and healthy mare and foal. If they're both thriving and they're both doing well, then you've done your job as breeders. You've successfully got there. You know, it's not the be all end all. If you have a dip here, there, and everywhere, like, the horses are horses, as I said. There's lots of things that can go wrong, will go wrong. But if you're dealing with a generally happy and healthy mare, there's a lot of things that you've done right. So there's things that we can support from a nutrition point of view, but yeah, there's a bigger picture to all of this, and it's your breeding program at the end of the day. So yeah, I think that's been probably a little bit whistle stop. I hope I haven't gone too quickly. Obviously, we're quite happy to take more questions and things that you might want to check maybe off the back of that. But that's kind of the main points, without bombarding you with too many specifics. That's kind of where I would start, and not to underestimate the importance of getting it right from that very first day with colostrum, and then moving on from there.
Thank you so much, Erin. That was really, really informative. I suppose just a couple of questions that have been coming in. I suppose a lot of people, particularly with the horse board, might have drafts or Connemara's. Is there a difference that you tend to see between the nutritional needs that, say, a Connemara foal would need versus a thoroughbred foal? Or is it kind of the same basics regardless of breed?
So nutrient requirements are the same, but your breed types will affect, like, you know, they hold their condition differently, obviously. Your Connemara's and your drafts are bigger, stockier types of horses. They're, you know, good doers, whereas your thoroughbreds need a lot more support in terms of condition. So they might not need maybe as much in terms of hard feed. That's where things like Grow Care Balancer can be really beneficial, because if they're doing well in terms of body condition, and, you know, you don't need to give them loads of stuff, that's where Balancer can come in, because they have the same nutrient requirements. They still need that support from a nutrition perspective to help them thrive and to help them grow and to help them develop. But you might not want to give those types of breeds all those calories from your typical fully balanced feeds in comparison to Balancers. So that's where things like Grow Care Balancer can really be beneficial.
And then another thing is, obviously, we've had some really, really bad weather. So I suppose there'll be people who had to keep, I feel like that's understatement of the century, but there'll be people who might have had to keep young stock in a little bit more than they'd want to, or who maybe would have had young stock out to grass now, and particularly mares and foals out to grass as soon as possible. Is there any impact on having them in that little bit more, having them on kind of more of a dried forage or preserved forage diet versus grass, and how might that reflect?
I think the key is that if they've been in longer, it's that they've been getting that forage. As long as they haven't been, you know, completely removed from that forage aspect, we want to get them out to grass for lots of reasons, rather than just the nutrient, you know, density of that grass. We want them to get out to grass to get moving, and, you know, lots of different things. So yes, the overall aim is still to get them out to grass, but if you've had to keep them in, it's not the end of the world. As long as they've been getting, you know, good quality forage, whether it's hay or haylage or whatever it might be. There's a lot of troubles with that at the minute as well, with people struggling to get hay in particular because of the weather last year. So there's not an awful lot we can do about that. If they've had to stay in, that's fine. Control the controllables. Make sure you're giving them some good quality forage to make up for the grass that they would have been getting, is the main point. And then, you know, you might have to use hard feed more than you would have if they've already been out of grass. So again, things like Balancer can be really cost effective in making up those differences of the nutrients they may have been previously getting from the grass, but they now aren't. So good quality forage and Balancer can kind of make up for the difference in what you would have been getting in grass.
Because that is the thing with the Balancer, isn't it? Like, you're feeding it by the cup. You're not feeding it in a scoop format. So, you know, you're giving a cup to a foal, which is, again, even for a foal, if you think the size of their body, it's a nice amount to actually consume.
That's
and
the
again,
thing.
cost effective.
Exactly. It's a nutrient dense format, so, you know, you don't need to feed an awful lot of it, in terms of quantity, but they're getting what they need from it from a nutrition point of view. So a bag of Balancer takes you a lot further than, you know, your typical bag of feed, should we say.
So on kind of the flip side of animals that might be struggling, for those kind of Mares and the drafts and the particularly good doers that might have kind of put on a little bit of weight. I know the spring grass, we don't feel like it's springing yet. You're already seeing it in horses that spring is kind of coming. For those owners who are looking at a mare who might actually be carrying a little bit too much weight towards the end of pregnancy, has now foaled, they want to put them in foal. How do you manage the weight when you want the mare to be level or gaining for covering versus the weight of the horse that's standing in front of you?
It can be tricky. It can be like it's a balancing act, and it's not always easy. The last thing you want is to completely stop everything and then they drop away on you, even if they're good doers. It can happen. So I would rather, if they were already, had sometimes too much covering, but they've had the foal and they're healthy, I'd rather just keep them at that and keep them steady to get them in foal again, rather than worrying about as soon as you've got the foal on the ground, oh, this mare's too heavy, I need to get the weight off her. Doing things too quickly can also be a problem. So we want to control that in a steadied manner. You don't want to do that all of a sudden. I would try and, again, it sounds like all we're talking about is balancer, but for those heavier types, obviously that's what we were saying with the balancer, it's quite easy to control. You're not giving them extra calories from things like, say, for example, a stud feed, a stud cube, or a stud mix. They'd be getting lots of calories from something like that. They won't from a balancer. So using things like that can help to control that. They still might be carrying too much weight, but I'd rather still support them from a nutrient point of view to make sure their milk supply is good, to make sure their milk quality is good, and then get them back in foal. And then you've got a period of time to steadily try and reduce that weight, rather than trying to do it all of a sudden. And again, it can lead to complications. So I think the key is not really to panic straight away. You can kind of control it over a period of time. Don't worry about your mare being too heavy and, next week I want her to be prime condition for covering. It's not realistic, and we need to just control it as much as possible. But things like that, I would say, use the Ask the Expert through the website. Contact us directly if you've got specific problems. You can attach pictures of your mares to those Ask the Expert queries, and we can actually see ourselves before we respond, so that, where there's queries like that, the specific one-on-one advice is really beneficial.
Brilliant. And then I suppose the last question that we'll do for today, for people who are getting foals ready for showing. I know there's a lot of foals who are barely on the ground and are starting into their showing careers and their showing journeys. Is there any sort of particular considerations you'd make in those instances? I suppose obviously you want your foal to be looking the best they can, and particularly if you're aiming for the RDS, you want the horse looking brilliant by the time that we get to that hopefully lovely sunny week in Dublin. What would your kind of top tips be, or your advice on that?
In terms of hard feed, is it?
In terms of like general, like managing growth curves, managing the foal as an animal, and then kind of tying into that career and that showing role.
Yeah, I think for the showing side of things, obviously you want them looking well from a condition point of view for a start. They need to be looking, overall like a strong enough foal. That can be supported by creep feeding, like we mentioned earlier. Other things I would think about for a foal going into showing particularly is supporting coat health and immune health. So using things like Coppervit is a liquid supplement we have, and that can be really beneficial for foals when it comes to coat health and immune health, and help to get them looking the way you would want them for a show ring. It's not an overnight fix. It's a daily supplement that you would use over at least kind of 3 to 4 weeks. So that's something I would take into consideration, because you want them looking well. And yeah, I think trying not to overcomplicate it is also important. Support them with a little bit of creep feed. give them a little bit of help for coat health and immune health. And from there, if there's any specific problems, ask us, but I would try and keep it simple.
And then for the mare, obviously, it is those essentials. It's having made sure that you've kept on top of the copper and all that sort of stuff to make sure that they're looking well by the time they've got a foaled foot.
Yeah, so we would have discussed that in the last webinar, where supplementing your mare with Copper Max paste in the last trimester of pregnancy actually increases the copper stores of your foal when it's born. So doing things like that ahead of time really do make a difference to your foal, because it's got those copper stores already there. It can then utilize them. You can obviously support your live foal as well, but if you've kind of planned ahead, which is what I had emphasized so much in the first webinar, then you're at a head start, really, especially if you know that that's your plan, that you're going to show these foals, or you might want to show these foals. That's definitely something you should be doing in the last trimester of pregnancy, is things like copper. So keeping on top of things like that. Then when complications come into it with, you know, managing growth curves and trying to manage that body weight ratio of how they're looking, how heavy they might be, what way are their joints, is there going to be any complications there? Managing that can be tricky sometimes, and you don't want them getting too heavy, which can cause complications. So they might not need a creep feed that's calorific or energy dense. They might just need a supplement such as things like CalGrow that can help support them through them stages of growth and development, while supporting those joints to make sure, you know, you kind of mitigate things like OCDs where possible. So yeah, there's definitely things you can do to control it, but I would 100% agree on what you said there about the, you know, planning ahead with your mare particularly.
Yeah, and then it's what we always say, do ask the experts. Genuinely, the expert nutrition team are a fantastic resource to have, and to have freely available as well. It's literally as simple as sending in that form, and it goes to a member of the expert nutrition team, and they are such a wealth of knowledge, the experience that they all have gathered up from years and years and years in the equine industry. So whatever your issues that you're having, whatever it is with your foal, with your mare, horses are such individuals, and you know, as much as we learn so much about them, we do still need to treat them as individuals, and that is where the expert nutrition team are invaluable. Particularly when you do have that mare who's an individual, or a foal, or just those little challenges that you know, it might be your first time seeing it, but it's probably not the nutrition team's first time seeing it. So it is a very important thing to have.
And it's also, you know, sometimes you might see something happening that's not happened to you particularly before and completely panic, and there might be a quick and easy fix. So it's not always, you know, the panic. It makes you send in the email, which is great, because then it might not be the biggest issue and we might be able to quickly solve it for you or give you that bit of support along the way. So, you know, we're there for a reason. You may as well use it.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Erin. We will have the next date for the next webinar in this series. We'll have that released soon. But thank you very much, Erin, and everyone enjoy your evenings.
Thanks everyone for joining.